Most books and stories about veterans were stereotypic. They were either the veterans are broken and lost or in trouble, or on the other hand, they're heroes. And my experience with veterans is that they're all those things, plus they're citizens. And so I wanted to intervene in the stereotyping of veterans from the media.
So for me, a successful transition is, a veteran going back home to their community and being a part of it, and the community supporting them and the veteran supporting their community. To me, that's what a successful transition is. And for a lot of veterans, it's very challenging to go back home. When you come home, you box up all your memories, your experiences, and you put them under your bed and you just kind of forget about them. I think there comes a time where you have to get that box out and you have to reflect and work through some of those experiences, which were good and bad, because, they're a part of you.
Hey, welcome to the first episode of this podcast with two guests. My guest today is Dr. Robert Turrill and Eddie Arambula. Sorry for mispronouncing your last name. I'll let you correct me, Eddie, once it's your turn. My honor and pleasure to have both of you guys on today. Both of my guests are veterans and co-authors of the book Veteran Stories of Transition and Transformation. You might have seen it in some of my other podcasts. A great book, and I'm super excited to talk about your guys' time writing this book and your experience with that, as well as some other leadership-related questions. And maybe we'll also touch things like mentorship and so on. But first of all, let's start with you, Robert. Why did you guys decide to write this book, and what is it about?
Okay, thanks, Danny, and appreciate your inviting us to do this today. This book is the second book of the series. We have a volume 1 and a volume 2. In volume 1, it was a description of this unique program, and that was one of the reasons for both books, is that it's a very unique program. For years, it was the only program of its nature in the United States. Now we have another school, Emory University in Atlanta, that is also having an MBV. But the program itself was so unique to me and interesting, I decided to start. I thought we should save it for the future and write a description. So the first book is about the program. After that, I got thinking, I would like to know what's happened to our alums. I also got thinking that most books about and stories about veterans were stereotypic. They were either the veterans are broken and lost or in trouble, or on the other hand, they're heroes. And my experience with veterans is that they're all those things, plus they're citizens. And so I wanted to intervene in the stereotyping of veterans from the media. And that to me is and then there's a kind of a lingering anti-military kind of feeling in the country oftentimes. So that was the point, was to find out where they are and eliminate the stereotypes by having them write their own stories. And so that's how we got to the 25 individual stories. Where are they now, and in their own voices?
Awesome. Appreciated. Dr. Turrill and Eddie, first of all, sorry for mispronouncing your name. Let me know how to do it correctly, and please share your side of the story. Why did you decide to write this book with Robert, and what's your story here?
Yeah, so I first met Dr. Turrill. I was in MBV cohort 4, so it was early on. Like you said, this unique program, and I don't think I would have tried it if it weren't for it being in the USC in the School of Martial. It just giving it a lot of credibility, and also it's just a tremendous staff that they have there. So I was in cohort 4, and now I think they're up to cohort 13, so a little bit over 10 years. But after my experience there at the MBV, I continued on to Texas State University, and I completed my PhD in educational and community leadership. So I had defended my dissertation and graduated, and I was looking for something to do, right, in terms of using what I learned in my journey, in my process, and how I could help other veterans. So I think it was timely, and I got with Dr. Turrill and told him that I was interested in working alongside with him on the project. And we've learned a lot from the beginning. And even last week at USC, we were invited to share with 9 authors, co-authors of the book. And continue to learn from their voices and experiences. Great working alongside my professor and now I dare to say colleague.
Awesome, awesome. So, you guys have had, an amazing opportunity to learn so much about transition, the military transition, not just by going through this process, but also by working closely with so many veterans who contributed to this book. And I also had a chance to speak with many veterans, the spectrum from active duty to fully transitioned, if you can call it that, to in the middle of it, to like just a week out of the military and so on. And I've learned a lot of different stories about transition. Some people struggle, some people can adapt to this new environment. Some people seem to be doing fine. So, Robert, the question to you, based on your experience, how to successfully transition out of the military, and what advice could you give to people who are about to start this process or maybe are going through this process now?
Thank you, Danny. One of the things that we found out is that if you provide a unit for membership, it recreates a bonding that most of the veterans miss as they transition out. And so, in that bonding with a class full of veterans, we created a community atmosphere where it was called a learning community. We reduced the effects of rank, and we had to work together to help people at various stages of their transitioning to get out. Transitioning is not a simple thing. It goes, let's face it, we don't get through transitioning. We stay with it until we hopefully get to another place and hopefully a better place. But we had to create a safe space where we could collaborate. No competition in this program. We're not competing with each other. We're supporting each other's success. And that helps. And one of the discussion points with veterans was that the programs offered by the military were too short, too isolated, not deals with their emotional situation primarily. And so they had to have this other. So we created an intentional structure and process to provide this safe space. And then our intervention was higher education. All of these people, all these veterans, before we see them, have a bachelor's degree in some field. We're not too interested in what the field is, because we'll still give them a basic business background in that. What we do, and then the other piece of transitioning is the job piece. And we have our own career counselor and director in the program itself. As a small program, that's very unusual. In MBA programs in business schools, you have an overall director and an overall career services. We had our own. So we had a career service, usually run by a veteran as well, who knows what he or she is looking for and then matches people with opportunities. And so the other things we did in leadership was to have all the members write personal goals, do some personal assessment, then write personal goals, and then have a goals buddy. So everybody paired up, had a goals buddy to keep them honest and on track. And then we started chipping away at what are the personal goals for personal growth, for career success, for reintegration within the community. So that was our focused entry into transition. But it is an ongoing issue. And
thank you, Dr. Turrill and Danny. Yeah, and I'll continue with, outside of higher ed and the MBV program, I think, those lessons and those tool sets that we learned there, very important self-awareness, self-reflection, and then moving on to outside of those spaces into your community, right? So for me, a successful transition is, a veteran going back home to their community and being a part of it, and the community supporting them and the veteran supporting their community. To me, that's what a successful transition is. And for a lot of veterans, it's very challenging to go back home. You find yourself very disconnected and that's sometimes very isolated, right? And I think that isolation and really is harmful for veteran and any individual. I think, so creating those spaces where veterans can share stories, can feel connected, can be a part of their community, could use the local spaces, like public libraries, community centers, and really be a part of that community. And for me, that's that's helps keep veterans and their families alive.
Awesome. Appreciate your perspective, Eddie. And what about some common mistakes that veterans make in this transition process? Maybe it's not seeking those resources. Maybe it's even not understanding your certain benefits that you might have, or maybe it's something else. Doctor, could you start with that, and then we'll continue with Eddie.
Well, briefly, because that's a focus that we didn't focus on. I mean, we didn't have that focus on what mistakes you're making. That our focus was on the positive side, the personal growth side, and what do you need to overcome. But when our culture assumes reintegration means only the veteran works on this, is a real problem culturally. Is that a lot of our veterans got back to their home and realized that they had changed enough to make it difficult to be reintegrated. So the culture needed to really take on their role in the reintegration. And so it wasn't so much the mistakes that the veterans made, but that oftentimes their family and communities and other people weren't prepared for them coming back and help them with that. I think the other thing, and again, it wasn't a mistake, it's just the power of the emotional impact and the PTS that many of them suffered from doesn't just disappear. Is there affecting one's point of view, affecting one's emotionality, affecting one's physical behavior oftentimes, and it takes time. So, I mean, if you call it a mistake to think you can do this fast, that may be it. But one of the things we didn't focus on was the mistakes. What I found, let me add something a little different, that I had never been with a group of people that were so service beyond self oriented. These veterans want to serve. And I found that just to be an incredible force because I had done, 40, 45 years of teaching at the graduate level and undergraduate. And I knew some people who were very service oriented, but I didn't know whole groups. I'd never been in a room where whole groups wanted to be of service. And so they're looking for this purpose beyond self. They look for establishing a new identity since it was so clear in the unit they belong to. And then they want the camaraderie of a new unit. Those three things then, purpose, identity, and belonging, became kind of three guidelines for us for what we were doing.
Thank you, Robert. Eddie, do you want to add anything here?
Just quickly, I mean, I don't think it's a mistake, but again, something that I went through and I see a lot of veterans go through is, when you come home, you box up all your memories, your experiences, and you put them under your bed and you just kind of forget about them. Yeah, I think there comes a time where you have to get that box out and you have to reflect and, work through some of those experiences, which were good and bad, because, they're a part of you. And I think it's hard to move forward, with this new identity, this new self, without really understanding what those experiences were, in the military.
Yeah, great point. And you guys mentioned that the big part of this is culture, that people don't really, like civilians who never served in the military, they might not provide as much support or help to the veterans who are struggling to adapt to this new environment. So for those listeners who are listening, they might have not served in the military, but they are patriots, they support veterans and people who served. What can they do now to help the veteran community, or maybe even like one individual veteran in their close group or in their friend group or something like that to improve the situation for them and to support them? Robert?
I think everybody, they have to listen and be open, first of all, and encourage the veteran to talk, with appropriate. If you look at history, I was just reading about the World War II veterans a couple of days ago, and they did not talk about, and PTS was called shell shocked and that sort of thing. And so most of them did not talk about it, and no one particularly was prepared to deal with that. In today's culture, we're more aware of it. And so there's been some very positive movements, like in organizations that have veterans hiring mission, where they have people assigned to actually get veterans hired and into jobs. And there's affinity groups within side organizations that help veterans stay together and have a close belonging. The other thing we were trying to do, of course, is to improve communication and self-awareness and interpersonal competences. I had veterans come to me later and say, this is the first I'm now able to have a conversation with my family. Well, if you think about that as coming back to this, it's really, that's a sad kind of sad state that both the family and the veteran have to deal with. And that's often a very difficult thing because the family expects the person who left to be back now. Well, that person is not the same. And so they have to be caring and empathetic. They have to ask questions, caring, and stay with them and not, feel avoidance. But it's all of us have to learn some of those issues. And so it's a complex situation, but there are big movements afoot in career service, for example, and organizations, embracing veterans in the job market, which is very positive. And then, of course, there's other interventions when they have to have medical assistance and that sort of thing. But I think Eddie is probably better prepared to answer some of those things too.
Eddie, please.
Thanks, Professor. Yeah, I want to take this moment to commend you, Danny, right, for what you're doing and creating a space for veterans and service members alike, past and present, to share stories, right? And I think that this is, the answer to your question is really, a great example of what you're doing. I think listening right firsthand to those veterans and their families that have served and letting them tell you, share stories and tell you what those challenges are and what those successes are and what those, pitfalls are. Anybody assuming that, because you know a veteran and you know a veteran story, that you understand the complete veteran experience, right? As you know, Danny, firsthand, right, from listening to people on the podcast in and outside, that it's very wide, right? The breadth of stories and challenges and successes. And, I would argue that, probably not two of them are alike. And that's something that we learned through supporting those 25 veterans and writing their own story, that there are similarities, right? But no two are the same.
Appreciate it, Eddie. And thank you for the kind words as well. And Robert, you mentioned that in your program, you mentioned leadership. And I'm curious to learn how you help to translate those leadership skills that veterans learned in the military to their new workplace environments in the civilian world. How is it different, and how you help veterans to adapt to this new corporate environment and apply those skills?
Okay. Couple of things. One, I encourage them to go out and lead, meaning it wasn't waiting for adaptation or somebody else to ask them. But what we tried to approach was a positive focus on leadership, starting with understanding oneself. You don't just adopt a role. There's no one role for leadership. You have to become very self-aware. You have to be self-assessing. And then you have to set goals and things that you feel you need to improve to be more effective. What I found, interestingly enough, I was very humbled going to talk about leadership to a group of veterans. Reputation-wise, the military does leadership right, okay? So they're actually very good at leadership. So I was humbled going in there and trying to talk. But what I found, of course, is this reception that they wanted to talk about it, that this was okay, that they knew about it. They wanted increased skills. And I hope that we make them feel positive about their own skill set, which they really should be. They're focused. They're very mission focused, task driven. They know how to get things done. One of the problems they face going into civilian corporate life often is that they don't find other people as driven as they are to achieve the mission and to do what's right and to be there early and all those things. Showing up and having a presence that speaks to your integrity and your capability is absolutely critical. And they start with that base. So what they have to do is just say, you have permission to go forward, go out there and lead. When I got working with these, I said, these people have to get out and lead. We need them out there. This isn't that they're waiting for us to be kind for them. No, it's a challenge. We need to urge them and encourage them to get out and take a stance, lead, be effective, help other people be effective, because they're the best group I know to do that. Then we talk about positive goals and personal growth. What do you want to do in the future? Who do you want to be in the future? And how do you get there? And they just eat that up. That's not a difficult task to get started with this group.
Thank you, Robert. Eddie?
Look, that's hard to follow, but I can share a little bit of my trajectory. When I was in the program initially, and we started to talk about leadership, and I thought we were going to be talking, theoretical, right? And so I felt comfortable there. And at the time, I really had a narrow definition of what leadership meant to me, right? Being an infantryman, and for me, leadership at the time was leading men into combat. And I saw that as the pinnacle of what leadership is or was. But through this process that Dr. Turrill mentions, I started to reflect and become self-aware. And and my definition is a lot more broad now, right? Leading by example, leading from the front. Those are two things that I continue to strive for from my time in service. But now I see leadership as a three-part, right? Leadership for self, leadership for your family or your organization, and then leadership in the community. So even after completing my PhD, it's same thing, right? Well, what can I do with this gained knowledge? What can I do with these experiences? What can I do with this skill set? And this book was one of the two things that came after my dissertation. And the other one is that I created a journal at Texas State University for veteran students, right? Not staff, I'm not faculty there. I'm just a community member, an alum that pitched an idea and got some support from some folks in the library. Yeah, I think like Dr. Turrill mentioned, this group is really driven, and we continue to find avenues to continue our leadership, and we continue to support each other, which I think is most important. Leadership, it doesn't happen in isolation, right? It's a communal thing. And I think part of that transition, a part of that reentry process is really, bringing that leadership that you have. And then what kind of leader do you want to become?
Great points, Eddie. Thank you for this. And as we are wrapping up the podcast episode, I want to give both of you an opportunity to speak to veterans who might just started watching this video for the first time. They might not know you. They might not know about your program or the book. For those people who transition or, are in this process or maybe struggle, what advice or what message do you want to share with them, starting with Dr. Turrill?
The first thing I would like to share, and then when Eddie talks about it, this is a strength for him to talk about. It's about storytelling itself. One of the things about the book that I discovered doing the book was that most books are written because you're attracting a reader audience. It's for the readers. Doing storytelling, personal storytelling, is for yourself. So this book is about not just for the reader, but it's for the writer. It's for the storyteller. And if you look at some of those back conclusions we made, is that we asked all the writers to reflect on this experience. And they said it was enlightening, it was cathartic, it was therapeutic, it was healing, it created hope and inspiration. There's all these things that this particular approach, storytelling, can do oftentimes that other things can't do. So one of the suggestions for anybody is to get into an environment where you can start dealing with yourself. And we always talked about people writing their stories. You got to be able to own it at the end. This is you. And you'd be surprised how many drafts Eddie and I read to people to get there. And they kept saying, yes, I'm learning more. I wasn't that on. I will get back at it. And they kept going. And then at the end, the reflection was, I think I understand myself better. I can be more assertive. So the storytelling piece of this is the other issue that, of course, I'm involved with is in higher ed and higher education. This group is very aggressive in higher education. There are 25 authors in the book. There were 43 to 45 degrees, advanced degrees. So there was almost a degree and a half for everybody in the program. So we used education as an intervention into this whole process. So Eddie, maybe you can talk about the storytelling piece more too.
There's a lot there, Danny. Yeah, some of the thoughts that came to mind is really from my dissertation where I wrote about the redwood forest. I was inspired and became a metaphor really for the veteran transition, right? Where a redwood tree is one of the greatest plants on this earth. They live for a long time. They're humongous, right? But grow to those sizes in isolation, right? They're connected by a root system. And then above the trees, you go up high and there's this thing called the canopy where there's a whole different world there. And it's interconnected by the trees. And there's even trees growing up there on top of the trees, a lot of animal life. And it became, like I said, a metaphor for how I think we should live, right? In community and not in isolation. I think there's only so much you can do and by yourself. So I think doing the tough work, right? Reflecting on your experiences, sharing stories with yourself, owning your story, giving yourself permission to be vulnerable, and then sharing stories, right, with family and friends, sharing stories in the community like we're doing here with Danny Lee. And I think you become part of the Redwood Forest that way.
Thank you guys for your perspectives. And as we are finishing the episode, I want to remind that the link to the book will be in the description. Please go ahead and check it out. But thank you both, Robert and Eddie, for joining me on the show today, for sharing your experiences and advice and for what you're doing. And yeah, glad to have you on the show today. And thank you again for joining.
Great. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks,
Appreciate your
Danny.
invitation.